Hey, everybody, just a heads up. The show's going to start in just a minute. I've got the giveaway open so you can enter to win the 2D tile set bundle. Just choose a race and a class with an exclamation mark in the front. There's a list of them in the description, the valid choices. So if you want to look, you look there or off to the side and see what everybody else has picked. And we'll get started in just a second. All right, hello and welcome to the GameDev show. I'm here with Justin and Andrew, and I think we might have one other person joining us soon. I wanted to say welcome everybody who's with us live and hello to everybody who's watching afterwards. Make sure that you hit the thumbs up button and subscribe, and thanks Justin and Andrew for being here as well. Really excited to have you both here. So hello.
Hello.
Hello there.
All right, so a couple of real quick announcements. First, the giveaway is up and running. Just hit the exclamation mark and choose a racing class. We'll be giving away the 2D tile set bundle. I'll show that off when we get a winner and when we get closer to a winner. Also, Justin has some exciting stuff going on this week. He's got a new VR Creator Academy that sounded really exciting. We actually talked about it quite a bit before the show, and there's a new quiz that you've put up that I've linked down below. Can you tell everybody what that quiz was real quick?
Oh yeah, it's a pretty fun little quiz where it's 13 questions. It's super quick. It takes you like 60 seconds to take, and it'll give you kind of a gauge on where you're at as far as game development, as far as programming, and then VR knowledge. And so you kind of take the quiz real quick and you get to see whether or not you are ready to jump into the VR game development or if you need a little bit more work. It's a cool little gauge of where you're at.
Nice. I want to take that afterwards and see how I do. Also, Justin has agreed to come speak at really curious. I fail. It's been a while since I've been deep in VR, but on the next, I guess it's Thursday if I get my dates right. On the 1st, so 9/1, Justin agreed to come do a talk at the next meetup that we're having. So another GameDev meetup, and we're going to do these monthly. They're totally free. There's a link in the description. They're a lot like an in-person meetup. Just go there. People will be giving presentations, trying to keep it at 2 presentations that are around 15 to 25 minutes with time for question and answers. The room will fit 150 people, so first 150 to show up will get in, get a chance to go talk to the speakers, meet other developers and other stuff. If you're interested in attending, there's a link down below. And if you want to speak at the one that's coming up, send me an email, jason@game.courses. Just send it over today with what it is you'd like to talk about. And if whoever gets in first with something that'll fit, we'll put you in for the second slot for this. Again, I think it's Thursday. It's on the 1st. Is that right? Thursday is the 1st?
Yeah, Thursday the 1st is. I think that's when.
Oh, so yeah, definitely come to that. Come check it out. It should be a lot of fun. Good opportunity to meet other developers. Maybe find some people who have game dev jobs, or if you got a game dev job and you want to pitch that to people. I know there's at least one recruiter who said he wanted to come, so there may be a couple more showing up. And then Andrew, you've got a new video out, right? Is this a new tutorial on the game modules?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a longer form tutorial. It's 50 minutes long, but in this one, I demonstrate how to use the game modules to set up a player, the generalized player in your project, and then use the game modules, the stats system and the condition system to create a hunger system. Essentially, the stats required to make a player more hungry over time, condition that increases their metabolism, so increases their hunger faster over time. And basically using the game modules to set those stats up quite easily, and then automatically once it's up, it just works. So you don't really have to do anything beyond that. You just say, hey, you're now poisoned, and suddenly their hunger's going down faster, and then poison disappears because it's only there for 5 minutes, and then and other things like that. So it demonstrates how to use the game modules, and it goes a little bit further. It also talks, gives 3 different ways of adding stats to a player. On the Discord last week, a couple of the newer users of the system were talking about how they get the stats onto their player. And so I demonstrate 3 different ways in the video to do that. And they all have their reasons to do it. One's just like, oh, I just need to add a quick stat. Doesn't matter. I'll just hard code it. Another one is doing things as you need them. So you don't even have to add it at the beginning, just whenever you need to say, hey, what's your might? And as soon as you ask the question, they suddenly have might when they didn't before, because it never mattered before. Kind of like Schrodinger's stat, I suppose. And then the third way, using a player setup where you can actually set values of specific stats. And then the last thing I demonstrate in this, that's not part of the hunger system at all. I think you actually made a video very similar to this a couple weeks ago, where we can see the stats in the inspector itself. So rather than printing them out to the screen, rather than printing them out to the console, there's just an inspector script you can add that will show live the stats that are happening on the character. So you can just click on the player, see what their stats are in real time, and not worry about it. And that's, of course, expandable. So you could add buttons and other things to add stats, remove stats, add values, and all that stuff. So long form video. Curious to see how people like it. 50 minutes long, totally worth it. Hopefully, I cut out most of my ums.
Well, yeah, I have to go check it out. That sounds kind of interesting. It's like building the bigger RPG systems, like those more complex systems, out of the combining a bunch of different stats and systems. It's kind of neat getting that hunger in there. That's cool. I'm curious. So you mentioned the UI system and the inspector stuff for saving or for viewing this data, because like you said, I did a video, I think it was last week or something, where I showed that space station and some of the debugging in the UI, like being able to see that stuff. But then a couple of days ago, I actually got the chance to talk to the UI toolkit team, and they told me that a lot of what they've been focusing on recently is kind of refocusing and rebound, or kind of going back to that foundation of the editor tooling where they started out and making that part as good as possible. I'm curious, have either of you guys dove into the new UI toolkit or the more recent versions of that with your stuff at all? I'm just kind of getting into it like this week, so it's been a while for me. I'm curious if either of you have a lot of experience there or any.
I have none. I like I think it was Benoit, is that his name? He said, I'm one of those who is just fine keeping using the existing one for now.
Okay.
That's kind of where I'm at too. Like with VR, all your UI needs to be world space. You can't do any like overlay type stuff, and so I tend to keep with the stuff that works at the moment, the tried and true.
And that was kind of what they had said, was that like world space is definitely one of the biggest weaknesses. It doesn't support it at all. And in my experience, I find that things like that toolkit make a lot of sense for like businessy apps or things where you need large amounts of data, spreadsheet, not exactly spreadsheets, but the type where you have large scale amount of data. But also I can see the use for UI stuff. So I was really curious about if anybody in chat has it looks like somebody in chat has done it. If you've done something or know a lot about the UI toolkit and have some advice, please drop a comment. I'm kind of curious because it's interesting. Like I said, I just kind of started getting into it, and I've been not finding a whole lot of information yet on how to use it the right way or the best way, or what all of the things I should know are. So if you got something, please drop a comment and let me know. What were the other things I wanted to talk about today? Let me think. There were two other big things. The first is tomorrow there will be an interview with the Unity CEO, John Riccatello. I got to do last week. So it was like a couple days ago. I recorded it. Did a little bit of editing, just fixing up the audio, getting rid of dings and stuff. And it's going up. So it's going to be super fun. It was really interesting. Got to talk to him about a lot of the things going on at Unity, kind of his vision and the plans for Unity, and a lot of the stuff about what's going on for developers specifically. There's a lot of stuff going on with like all the businessy news. And I just kind of wanted to ping him about like actual development, game dev stuff, which I didn't know. The interview kind of came about by me just asking. I just literally sent a message and said, hey, I would love to interview John about game dev stuff if he's ever open to it. And I thought they would for sure say no. And I got back a reply saying yes. And I was like, oh, totally shocked. I got to get ready. I was like, this is awesome. So it was really cool. It was totally open. We just had a nice chat about a lot of the stuff that I was curious about and a lot of the things that the community was curious about. There were a few things that I was going to ask, but I'm going to ask some other people at Unity that actually have the more detailed answers. There are a couple more technical questions that I kind of passed on, and I'm going to have somebody else answer them, I think. They said they could get me somebody who could really dive into the details. But for the overall vision and everything that's going on there, if you're curious about that, make sure that you're subscribed or hit the little, whatever it is. I think there's a remind me button or something on the premieres. So I'll be there kind of chatting with everybody as it goes out, talking through stuff, see what everybody thinks. And if you guys have follow-up questions or something, let me know. Maybe I'll get to talk to them again. Could be cool. And so that was a lot of fun. If you guys have any questions about that, feel free to ask. I mean, I don't want to spoil the whole thing, but the other thing that I wanted to talk to everybody about was the universal render pipeline. I think URI may be coming. I'm not completely sure if URI was gonna pop in today, but I got the opportunity to talk to the URP team later on this week, or I'm getting the opportunity to talk to them, and I wanted to kind of make sure that I can present the most prevalent and most important questions to them so that we can record it, get it out, get the answers out to everybody, and kind of inform people. And I thought that there was no way to get better questions than to just ask everybody in the audience. If you have specific URP questions, something about the render pipeline that you're curious about, drop it in the chat, drop it as a comment, and also email it to me at the same time. So I would say do all three. Make sure that it definitely hits on my list. The more times I see it, the more people I'll think sent it, and the more likely I am to have that one be on my list. So if you send it in 3 different places, I will see it 3 times and probably think that 3 people have that same question. So send it all of the times. And we may talk a little bit about those today, especially if URI hops in.
Did you invoke Uri by saying his name 3 times?
No, I only said it twice. Uri.
Yeah, 3 times in a row. It works for story, so it might work for Uri too.
No, if anybody was going to have questions about it or like some in-depth knowledge, I think Uri has been like deep into the Unity rendering stuff recently, more so than I have, but by far. So I think you'd have some really good insight there. Okay, so let me think. Did I have any other big topics? Is there anything else in the description that I didn't mention? Let's see. Let's hit the edit button.
Yeah, that's where your notes outline is.
that's my notes outline right there. What's the title? What are the things that we're talking about today? Okay, so it doesn't look like there was much else. So does anybody in chat have URP questions? Oh, somebody did have a note. 8bits per play mentioned that Unity did release a new URP PDF. I'll get the link. I'll put that in the description too. I have a link to it. I just need to find it, and I'll drop that in the description. You can go grab that and check it out. It's like a really detailed, really long book about URP. So I've started going through it, but I haven't made it all the way through because I'm so slow at printed text. I don't know about you guys, but like reading printed text, I really like it. I enjoy it, but I'm so slow at it. It takes me forever to absorb the words versus like I really like video with subtitles at 2x speed. So I can hear it.
2x speed, but I like video.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it depends on the person. Some people I can listen to at 1x or 1.5, but some people talk really slow.
Yes.
And I got to 2x them, and it drives me nuts. Otherwise, I'm like, what's going on here? Is this thing paused? So I got to.
Story you can only listen to it 1x speed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's some people it's super dense, but a lot of the time there's people just with lots and lots of pauses. All right, so URP question. I'll get some improvements or tools to fight shadow. Yeah, good question. Again, I don't have the answers to any of these. These are all just questions that I want to mark and save off to start asking their team about the universal render pipeline.
Yeah. So I have a potential misconception about URP because I don't use it myself directly because I'm, when I focus on the asset stuff, I have to go bottom up from built-in all the way up. So I don't do URP in my projects. My understanding or assumption, perhaps fake wrong assumption, is that generally speaking, URP is really meant for mobile, for when you want performance over quality, and it limits the number of lighting that can cast shadows, etc. Limits the terrain, the number of textures on terrain, etc. And then in my head, I always thought, okay, so then that means we should be using HDRP if you're not basically targeting mobile. Is that a misconception that I have?
So that is, I think, a little bit of a misconception. I think that, and I again, I'm going to talk to the URP people, so we'll get this cleared out from the actual source. But my understanding is that that's more what the lightweight render pipeline was before. But then the lightweight render pipeline got kind of merged in with the universal, and I think my understanding is that the universal should soon be kind of the default. Universal render pipeline would be like the one that supports everything except for the really crazy like ray tracing, super advanced, like the really detailed HD stuff that'll be in HDRP. And that my expectation, again, I have no inside knowledge or anything, is that SRP will probably be deprecated and no longer be the default sometime soon. That would be my guess. I'm going to ask them though and see if that's actually accurate or not. But I think that the default should be URP sometime near in the future once they have complete feature parity. And I think from what I understand, they are now saying that they're at feature parity with the built-in, but I might be wrong on that. There might still be something that's missing, but I think the last couple things were there. And now it's probably just a matter of pipeline and tooling. But again, there could be totally different stuff that I don't know about. I'm just talking my best guesses, and I want to find out as much as possible. But I think that the goal is that URP is the default and HDRP is for people who want to use want the HD. What about you, Justin? What was your understanding here? I'm curious if we're all on like totally different views.
No, I'm kind of on the same level you're at. So I said they'll eventually discontinue the built-in render pipeline and just do URP and HDRP. And most of the tutorials that I've been doing are URP based, and I'm usually driving people towards that because with VR, you've got your headsets that are basically super not optimized mobile phones, like less than mobile phone capability with this. But as soon as you plug it into your computer, I can now run super high-end, high-quality graphics off of my computer into the headset. And so the URP pipeline allows me to just swap out the level of detail with a scriptable object, and then it makes it super easy to swap back and forth. So you just kind of do a check and say, okay, what headset are they using? And if they're using a high-end headset, connect to a computer, then I can swap out and give them the high-end graphics. And then it also lets me scale up and down based on their preference.
Okay, that's the other thing I was thinking. For VR, it's got to be URP, right? When did the switch happen to URP for VR as like the default?
I don't even know. Like a year ago, maybe. But yeah, I generally try to stay within URP. And then you have to. A lot of assets will start with the built-in, and then I'll upgrade them to URP if they don't have like a hey, download this package for URP. And then there's always inevitably some like materials you have to go in and like they have their little custom shader you got to go in and like try to recreate on your own. It's always the hologram.
Ask you, Andrew, how is the that conversion process? You got a lot of assets in standard. Like, if you want to support URP for one of your assets, is there anything that makes it hard, or is it easy all around? Or
it's not
very
terribly difficult. So all the standard shader stuff can be converted with just the click of a button, which is very nice. That didn't used to be the case when URP or lightweight render pipeline first came out and HDRP first came out. That wasn't the case. So it was a pain. And I, as many others, just said I'm not supporting it at this point because I'm not going to do all that. But the custom shaders for hair and other things, those can't be converted automatically. And so luckily, Amplify Shader Editor exists and works in all of the pipelines, whereas the shader graph does not. And I don't know if this was a decision by Unity thinking, oh, well, built-in is going to be deprecated, therefore we won't make shader graph work in built-in, or maybe they thought that would encourage people to migrate over. But the end result for someone like me means I can't use it. I have to use Amplify, which is perfectly fine. Amplify is a great product. And it means that other people can easily edit it as well if they have Amplify. And then so like I'll package the new shaders, the other shaders for HDRP and URP in a Unity package inside there. So if you bring in any of my packs into a URP project, hair will be pink after you migrate stuff. But then if you just double click that, you'll get the URP hair shader. And then you might have to, find it on the list. It's just right next to the other shader. It's just called hair URP. And then you're fine. But so it's feature parity on the pipelines, but it does require a tiny bit of I don't think that's the case that you can use it in.
See in the comment, and there's some in chat. Someone says they made a video about it 2 weeks ago that you can use shader graph in built-in. News to me, so that's interesting. I have to check that out.
Yeah,
You just can't do a conversion. I wonder. Yeah, I have to check that out. I did not know that.
So that could be then
anything in Unity if you write enough code.
Good point. I'll have to check that out for sure. But I think the conversion would be a deal breaker for me, because with the Amplify, I can write one shader and it's going to work almost all the time with the two other pipelines the exact way it is. I just have to basically load it up in an HDRP project in Amplify and export it or save it from there. So it's not a huge hurdle, but I think that'll all change once. I mean, I assume when with URP becoming the new standard, I hope there's like at least 6 to 12 months heads up so that folks like myself can casually get ready. My personal preference has always been, as long as most of my users are using built-in, I'm not going to default to URP because it will be a lot harder to go backwards.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's going to be a transition period, I think, where I'm still going to be delivering. I'll probably, once I know the date, if they say today, hey, 1 year from September 1st, 2023 is when it's going away, I'd probably update all my stuff, in March of next year to be parity with built-in. And then from that point on, build a new version in a higher Unity editor version in order to work on URP. So people can still get the old one if they use like 2020. And then if you use 2021, you get the URP version. So it'd just be a, transitionary period.
Yeah, I think you're right. Looking at chat, it looks like a lot of people say the shader graph has happened for standard, and we just didn't know about it. So,
we're out of the loop.
again, this is why I like doing these shows. Like I almost always learn something new, either from somebody on here or somebody in the comments. It's super helpful.
You're too busy talking to the C-suite over at Unity in your
Right?
ivory tower to know what's going on in the ground.
Yeah.
Disconnected from us lowly devs.
I really do want to do some more interviews though. So that got me really excited to want to start interviewing other people. Like I was telling you, I need to next interview John Carmack for real.
Is he the number one?
But
the number one
that's like the end goal. Then I can retire. It looks like we have a URI coming in, which is perfect for our chat about URP. So welcome, URI.
Hi there. Looks like I'm on low FPS.
No, you're looking good here. It seems good to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully it clears up. But before we get dive into a quick conversation about URP, which I'm sure is going to come up. If you wanted to enter to win the giveaway, I'm going to start it in about 1 minute. So you've got to choose, just pick a race in a class, hit exclamation mark, put it in there at the beginning, and then we'll kick off the battle. The battle will run through the rest of the show, and then at the end, whoever's the last one standing will win. And the prize, if I can get my link, is in the description, but it's this 2D tile set bundle. We'll get back to doing writer licenses soon. I just need to get off my butt and find the writer licenses before I give them away. I've got them somewhere. I just can't figure out what I've done with my emails and mix it all up. So if I win again, we'll again give it to the second place. Actually, I didn't enter to win this time because somebody was already there. So yeah, so you enter to win the 2D hand painted tile set bundle. Just choose a race class, exclamation mark at the beginning, and I'll kick that off. Carmack was actually on Lex Friedman's podcast recently. It's kind of what got me thinking about it. Again, I don't think it's realistic, but it's like a nice dream goal, right? Like an end. Put it up. So that's up and running. I guess we can, or it's going to start in a second. You guys will see it start. The buttons will count down, and I won't talk about it. So, URP, Yura, you got any thoughts? Any questions?
Too many.
Like, did you know that shader graph worked for built-in?
Yes, I was made aware of something like that. I never bothered to test it because Amplify exists, as you just talked about.
Oh, okay. But you didn't know. I didn't know about that. That was a new one to me.
So it wasn't something that worked initially. Like that, it was added later, as far as I recall. Yeah. So in general, shader graph is both an amazing tool and something that's clearly underdeveloped for certain features in Unity, and that's something I actually wanted to bring up. So in regards to questions about URP, right now they have a roadmap, and those who haven't looked at it should definitely go look, because there's a lot of exciting stuff in there, and you also get to learn about stuff that you missed across Unity versions that are getting released. But on their considerations, they have support for UI integration with shader graph. And right now, the thing that doesn't let you have that is specifically that for a shader to work with UGUI, or Unity's UI current implementation, not the new UI elements, you need certain things to be included in the shader. And those things are not available at this time to be made by shader graph. So when it creates your shader, it doesn't include those certain shader bits. And there's absolutely no option to add that. What you have is an option to export the code from shader graph as a shader code file, and then you can add them yourself. But you have to have the preconceived knowledge of how to do that, what you actually need to add, and then you have to manually do it every time you want to make a change to that shader graph. And it's a complete waste of like a very good feature. Now in Amplify, it literally all just works. You can just make your shader in Amplify, set it to work with UI, and done. So I really, really hope that they add that, because I like making my UI pretty, and I hate not having a clean, easy way to do it. I either have to commit to doing it entirely by code or doing it with manual steps or import amplify. Yeah.
It's an interesting one. I never do anything fancy on my UI, so I can totally see yours looking pretty though.
Yeah, so another thing on that, by the way, you talked about UI elements as well, right? So with UI elements, the core pitch is that Unity UI, the UGUI implementation, is slow and it's not intuitive for people who actually worked in designing UI before to come in and do your UI for you. Because when you're hiring people to do a project, you want to be able to have somebody who's competent and like able to iterate quickly and knows how to construct UI, which is generally front-end web developers. And what UI element pitches is that those developers can now come into Unity and do what they need to do quickly because it's designed for them. And it's also done with the backend that guarantees one draw call, as far as I recall, which is way faster. The problem there is that games typically try to appeal for entertainment, and UI designed for entertainment usually tries to be a bit more flairful, beautiful, have dynamic elements, with certain specific visuals. And those don't necessarily allow you to have this one draw call guarantee, and you actually need a lot more animation components included, and that's not necessarily intuitive to work with UI elements. Now, there is a comparison, features comparison page of UI elements, UGUI, and ImGUI if you like going retro and terrible. And that one is really useful to keep tabs on. But I really want to know what they plan to do about things like particles in UI. If you want something starry or something with embers on it, what can you do in order to have that in UI elements? So
yeah,
that would
my
be a
guess
question
is that for now, at least after talking to them, that they would probably recommend that for those you stick with UGUI, and that it seemed to me that the core and the origin for UI Toolkit was around editor development, making that editor experience a lot better. And then they realized that there was some value in having some runtime stuff there too. For not, I don't think for everything, but for the I think there have been a lot of business applications that I've worked on where a simple editor, a UI toolkit like that would actually make some sense. And I've looked at some of the asset store ones. I never ended up grabbing any because I didn't want to learn one of them and figure it out. But a built-in one could make sense when you need to show and visualize just lots of relatively boring data, information about stuff that's not usually not game related. Those are the scenarios where I saw it being really kind of applied in games. But it seemed to me, and again, I could have kind of misunderstood a little bit, but it seemed from the conversation that they generally, for like the more gamey game stuff, they recommend you stick with UGUI for your in-game UI, but look at UI Toolkit for the editor stuff, and only the editor stuff. I mean, again, unless it makes sense for a specific scenario, but it didn't sound like they think or expect it to be used for like every game or for most game scenarios, because I think it's like you said, you want it to be fancy, flashy, and you're probably also not showing a lot of stuff. You might be showing like 2 or 3 bars and a couple numbers. You're not showing a whole spreadsheet full of shit that you need and a bunch of charts and stuff like a web dev.
You'd be surprised. Strategy games are data heavy, as one example.
The strategy game is maybe the one where like a UI toolkit might actually fit, like a big strategy game. But then you still have to deal with the other thing. You probably just build it yourself.
There's more to be had there. Like, for example, ARPGs are also information heavy. Typically, any game that wants to give you all the information to be competent or has big descriptions. For example, if you want a chat log in a visual novel game.
I'm thinking data heavy, like shitloads of columns and rows of all kinds of info and things where you got to like drill down into detailed data on stuff. I can think of a lot of business applications that I've used where like you got to look at all these sites and then you got to click through and look at the data for the site, and being able to just expand out a tree view makes more sense than something like fancy and pretty.
Definitely.
And which may not work in a game, even in a strategy game, it might not be pretty enough.
Yeah. So I think my camera died. Yeah, that's been an occurrence lately with the camera.
Your rendering's broken.
He's using
Yeah,
URP.
I guess I need to switch to HDRP or something.
It can't support 5 cameras, see?
Yeah, so I'm gonna try and go fix that for a moment.
Yeah, no problem. We'll give your eye a second to pop back in. Data tables. Yeah, and talking in chat about some of the other things. A grand strategy idea. Have a trouble with the basic UI. Yeah, I feel like it gets difficult for me to design like a good UI that makes sense. I find that the best way to do it is to just do it on paper. Like I tried doing it in game and it's always terrible, but just get a pen and a notebook with like an empty notebook with lots of pages. I like the big spiral ones. Turn it sideways and just draw out a design, then flip to the next page, draw out another one, and draw out like 3 or 4 like totally different ones first, just to like get a huge variation, and then start to work from that. Like pick out the parts that work, because if you force yourself to do like a bunch of different designs, you won't come up with the same default generic shit. You'll get some inspiration and some other ideas. This is what works for me. So just go through, do a bunch of them, and then kind of dig through and pick out the best parts and then kind of refine it. But use a pen too, so that way I don't go back and erase it. I can just kind of see what my other ideas were. Like, oh, if I don't like the idea, yeah, I just go on to the next page. Paper's cheap, so just flip to the next one and continue.
You end up getting a flip book that you can flip through and see your animations.
Yeah, or I can like rip the pages out and just put them all there and be like, I kind of like that part. I like that. I like the way that I did this piece here. And it's really, really fast. A lot faster and easier than software where you have like the typical constraints. With a pen paper, like I can tear fucking paper if I want, like, and be like, oh yeah, this is now a folding screen. I don't know. You can do whatever you want though. You got like total freedom. So I recommend that way.
Have you looked at?
Go for it, Andrew.
Okay. Have you ever looked at those sites that show you UI from other games? You mentioned you didn't want to repeat things that have been done, but I've only looked at them a couple times. What I like about them is there's a lot of games I've never played, and I'm not going to play them. But this is a way to look at it and be like, whoa, that's a different idea that I hadn't thought of.
Yeah, game UI database. Is this the one you're thinking of?
So yeah, that there might be others similar. I forget the exact one.
Yeah, this one's really cool. You can go through and see like every screen that they had. I think you can search for just about any game. Yeah, it's super cool. Yeah. I'll link this in chat.
One of the things I like to do with my UI, knowing full well that I'm going to change it and it's going to be vastly different multiple times throughout the production, is to ensure that I can change it and try to be clever enough to not make it so that it's difficult to change my UI later, because I'm going to.
Speaking of, there's like a lot of design structure about keeping your UI changeable despite having the same code. So for example, because most of UI is just about user interface presentation, you can write the code the same way, and where it just fills in fields, but it doesn't care about what these fields actually look like. You could change the font, you can change like how big the elements are, how many elements there are to change, what colors they have. UI themes, in essence, are just game objects or elements in the UI elements, and you find them in the tree structure and you just set their values for specific stuff. One of the things that's like really interesting about UI elements is that they have the named queries where you can just find all the elements of a specific structure, and then you can apply code over them. As opposed to UGUI, where it's all game object-oriented components, where you have to do things Unity style. They give you an approach that's way more web dev or straight-up code-friendly. Just one line of code to query for the specific elements you need, then do everything about them, instead of having serialized fields and having to bind everything together.
Yeah, I need to dig into this. It's like my task this week was to dive into UI toolkit. I started a bit earlier this week, and it's like my test for this upcoming week. I'm going to dive in and see if I can get into it a lot. And I just wanted to call out this comment too in chat at the Unity Shader Bible. It's a shader graph corrected in the next one, but the Shader Bible book. I don't know if you guys have seen this. I saw it all over Facebook and I was like, oh, this looks cool. They launched it. I grabbed it and I'm still like only 20 pages in because, like I said at the beginning, I read so slow. I'm like the terribly slowest reader, but it is actually interesting and useful stuff. It's like one of these books that I really hope I can make it all the way through. I have it by my bedside table, so whenever I get the urge to read a page or two, it's just like after reading like 2 pages, my eyes are tired and I can't do it anymore. It always happens with reading for me. I probably need to go to an eye doctor, but it's never going to happen because I can see really good and I don't want to fuck that up.
Audiobooks.
Yes, that's the thing.
Figured out
with
the UI
a
for
shader,
your economy game?
I have not. So I've been trying things out. I mean, I actually, the UI that I have now, I sketched out and it's kind of dealt with the things that I had, but now I totally redesigned the game and I need to redo the UI completely. And I have not sketched it out. I've been trying to think of what I want to do there, but I'm going to follow that exact same process was what I'll do. I'll go grab the notebook and I'll probably sketch out like probably 10 different UI ideas and try them out for the different windows. Because it's going to be super UI heavy. But I was looking at UI toolkit, and that's kind of what reminded me of it because I started playing around designing one in there, and I was like, why am I doing this in here? I should be doing this on paper and then just recreate it in here. It would be so much better. So that's the plan, at least. Let me get rid of this. Where was my... There was some other comment, but I lost it. I don't know. All right, so URP. Did you have any other URP related questions or thoughts, URI?
Yeah, of course. So one thing that's probably going to happen to most developers out there at one point in time, if they have a game with a world and that world wants to have UI and that UI wants to show something related to what's in the world, there is this concept called camera stacking where you can render a camera on top of another camera, and you can dictate what layers are rendered with each camera. So you can have a layer that is the world, then a layer that is the UI, and then a layer that is, for example, your character again showing over the UI. For example, like Breath of the Wild, where you can see Link, or an inventory where you can see your character staring at you. So when you equip the items, you can see the changes visually on the character. Right now, this layering system, known as camera stacking, has problems with applying individualized post-processing. And I have not found a solution to give one layer its own post-process and the other its own post-process, and then finally on everything, a final post-process step. So I was wondering if this is being addressed in any way for URP, because that would be pretty great to have. For multiple reasons. For example, one of the games that I like playing the most has this feature where, depending on what you do, the entire world gets changed out into another scene, but the characters stay on top of it. And during the way that the world changes, it desaturates and then darkens, and then another scene shows up behind them. You can see that a lot in fighting games where you do finisher moves and like the entire background changes to a completely different scenery. And that is not easy to achieve at the current time. So I would love to see a solution for that. On top of that, there is another feature with URP, or rather lack of feature with URP, is that when you use Unity built-in rendering, there is a shader for distortion. Specifically, if you make a particle with a fade type, there is an actual checkbox for distortion where you can provide a distortion texture and distortion strength, and it would do distortion post-processing-esque effect for you, where it would move things around on the screen fitting for what you're trying to make. So if you're making a shock wave, or if you're making a heat wave, or whatever it is you need, a fuming vent, etc. URP does not have that. And trying to implement it in URP is a big pain, a very big pain. So it gets into a bit of how rendering works in general in Unity. Specifically in that, a computer needs to have instructions on what to draw for you in an application. And a lot of people take what engines do for you for granted in that. When you have rendering in, say, built-in, which is primitive, so to speak, not demeaning it in any way, it's doing what it's told to do directly, no nuance, no trying to optimize for you. It will just draw everything in the order that the shaders are made for it. So you have your shaders, and you want some structures about them because there is a lot of detail. For example, depth of opaque shaders needs to come before any transparent shaders are there, so that they know what to be behind because they do not write depth, which is an entire other complicated topic that we'll get into another day. But basically, beyond just having the steps in the shader order, built-in does not do anything for you. So when you tell it, hey, I have a shader that takes whatever is on screen, grabbing the pass of whatever was drawn, and then it takes the pixels from that and draws it in another way, which is distortion, so to speak, you can implement it at any point in the visual of the scene, and built-in will just render it for you exactly as you asked. If it needs to grab a pass, it will grab the pass at that exact point, which has a gigantic performance cost, but it will do it entirely intuitively. And it does do some optimization behind the lines. For example, when you have multiple instances of the same distortion shader, only the first pass grabbed is used. So it's not like you're paying the cost a million times. You're just grabbing a pass, using it immediately, and you're done. With URP, you don't have that. You don't have distortion shaders. They're nowhere to be found. There is no grab pass renderer feature. And if you want to have any of that, you have to implement the entire thing manually. Now, I say that you have to implement the entire thing manually, but there's actually a GitHub page that's like entirely available for a grab pass. You can just yoink that code, drop it in your project, make sure it's MIT licensed, by the way, and then you have to add the renderer feature by yourself. You have to make a shader for distortion by yourself. You have to make a renderer layer just for the distortion shaders by yourself. And you have to make sure that that renderer feature uses that layer and that all the effects that you make with the shader are on that layer. It's a gigantic hassle. And I was really hoping that we wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel with that. So if you come into URP, there is a grab pass at point renderer feature ready for you to consume and draw it in a specific way, draw what you need in a specific way. Maybe a shader that grabs whatever things are on a named texture. Answering the question on screen, isn't the distortion issue fixed with the new render layer system though? It is not. It is entirely separate to that problem. Specifically in that, if you wanted to have distortion there, you'd be applying it on top of post-processing, which is not necessarily what you want to do because distortion might be occluded by things in the world. For example, if you want to have like a distortion that's only affecting a portal, but the portal is slightly obscured by a rock or whatever, you don't want the rock distorted. So there's that.
Like flames and smoke or heat distortion.
Yeah. So to get to the point here, I would have loved if there was nothing to obscure the path from I want a distortion shader in URP and me getting that distortion shader, because the time investment just to get that is gigantic right now, especially if you don't know the path.
So can you explain the post-processing issue a little bit more? There's a comment saying I may not understand with multiple post-processing, but if they add two global volumes with different post-processing profiles, it seems to be working. I don't think that's exactly what you're talking about, though, right?
That's not what I'm talking about. So specifically, the problem with renderer layers is that the post-processing will try to stack up and apply again and again on every layer on top of the first layer that is being used. We're not talking about post-processing volumes that can stack up. We're talking about camera stacking, specifically multiple cameras, and then the post-processing applies to all of them. There are some ways to hack around it, but none of them are clean and none of them are intuitive. So I
These
was
are
wondering.
good questions. So I think I'm gonna have a lot of fun talking to the URP team. I'm gonna
I do make sure to experiment with it before, though.
Yeah, well, I'll send them some stuff. So if there are easy answers, they can just tell me in advance, and or I can send them to you, and then we can follow up and see if there's more that's getting missed too. But my expectation is it'd probably be some useful stuff for them to answer and kind of get out in front of people. And there've been a couple other questions in chat, but I also want to say if you had something that you wanted to ask the URP team or you wanted me to ask them, just shoot me an email at jason@game.courses too, so I don't forget, and I'll add it to my list of possible questions.
Yeah. So just to get back a bit on the discussion about why URP is different from Burp. So specifically, with URP, they tried to start making the passes more nuanced in a way that you can separate them out so that you can inject your code anywhere you need to, and you can do a lot more advanced things, and you also have better performance because they're trying to optimize everything for you. That said, so with the lack of the render feature, they tried to kind of compromise and give you a color texture, which is rendered specifically after all the opaque objects in your scene are drawn, but it will not let you distort things that are transparent. So you can distort all the opaque things like your character, like the terrain, etc., etc. But this effect, in the attempt to sample the color texture, will overwrite anything behind it. So what does that mean? That means that if you have a character and then a fire and then your distortion effect, the distortion effect will sample the scene without the fire in it, and then the fire will just disappear behind it. If you've seen bugs like that in other games, that's what's happening. There are a lot of things that can cause that. It not necessarily is a URP exclusive problem, but that's what you see when you have this kind of transparent object texture sampling ignorance of sorts.
Well, it looks like we almost have a winner for the giveaway. It's down to the top 4. The prize for this one is going to be the 2D hand-painted tile set bundle. I'll drag that out of the way so you can see it. I'll link that in the chat as well. And thanks to Daniel for giving out some of those to give away. We'll get back to rider licenses soon too. I think maybe next week if I can get around to finding the codes. I know I have them somewhere. I just gotta figure it out and find them before I give them away. We got a few minutes left. Was there anything else with URP that you had, Yorai?
Let's see. We talked about the color texture, which I wish, by the way, ask them if they can do it. That would be amazing. To just add after transparent color texture and shaders that can actually consume that by default, that would be the best thing ever, because it would solve 90% of the steps needed to get distortion shader going properly. So that beyond that, there is something going back to the UI image stuff with the shader graph specifically. So I tried dots a lot recently. And with dots, there is a way fancier way to instance your rendering, so you can batch all the things that you render properly with shader graph. So they added a new dropdown in the shader graph that lets you select that your shader supports dots batching, and then with dots you can just make components that let you, like, say, I am modifying this shader shader property block and its values through dots, and it runs extremely well. Like that, it is sincerely a dream feature to have in Unity. But if they can add something like that for UI, so just a checkbox to say, hey, this shader targets UI, like right now shader graph master nodes lets you choose which rendering pipelines you support. So for example, they have URP, HDRP, and VFX graph. If they could just add Unity UI there, it would be fantastic. And they really don't have to do a lot. We were talking about like 10 lines of code as far as I recall. for the inclusion. So I that's on my wish list. So I don't have
Sounds
to
like
import
an
Amplify
interesting-
every time.
Yeah, I need to get into this stuff. It sounds like an interesting one. Andrew, there was a question for you I wanted to pop up before we run out of time. They were asking if you created any other mystical characters like wizards or warlocks. You've got these RPG characters. You've got a human, an orc, a minotaur, my favorite, and
Yes,
the Medusa and all the other stuff. But what about wizards, warlocks? You got any of those?
So we have new characters coming. We have a banshee which can do magic, but that's not what you're asking. I think I think that what we're looking at right now is kind of a self-inflicted wound, or maybe not really a self-inflicted wound, but just the nature of the beast when it comes to humanoids and our desire to share textures, or not textures, to share wardrobe. So really what we're looking for is wardrobe that would make one of the humans or other characters into a wizard or a warlock. And right now, to add wardrobe, it's extremely time consuming and extremely expensive, because we have 3 races: humans, elves, half orcs, and each one has 2 bodies, male and female. So there are really 6 bodies. Each one's different. Each one has more blend shapes than we probably actually need. And every time we create one new wardrobe thing, let's say a robe, that robe needs to fit to 6 bodies, needs to work with all 6 blend shapes. So it needs, each one of those 6 versions of the robe needs dozens and sometimes hundreds of blend shapes, depending on what body parts it covers. And it gets very tedious. So that's why we don't have dwarves, for instance, because instead of making dwarves, I said, okay, let's focus on making the armor work with all 3 that we have rather than dwarves. Now you can kind of make dwarves with the new hair pack, though. So you can make the half orcs smaller, make their bellies bigger, make their nose bigger, put a big beard on them. Look kind of like a dwarf now, for at least fun and games. Some noise started behind me, and it's very confusing. It sounds like it's coming from inside, but there's nobody else here. So,
that you know of, right?
Yeah.
There's also
actually, I just want to say that was a big issue at Sony too, with armor specifically, like getting armor made for the different races, because there were so many different ones that could blend and morph. It was like a big, long, tedious process, and there was a lot of tooling work that was done to kind of make that easier and optimize it for the artists, because there's a lot, especially when you get like 20 different races, and you're like, what the fuck am I supposed to do now?
We're working on a solution too. So hopefully we can solve this, because that's the problem. The solution that we're working on, and we're investigating it now. Ashley, a wonderful modeler that I just started working with pretty much full time, is working on this, and basically changing it so that for the humanoids, there's essentially one body with very precise blend shapes and very high quality blend shapes, slightly higher polygon count, so that we can get really good definition when the muscles get bigger or whatnot, that you actually see muscles getting bigger. And perhaps even a new shader that combines normal maps so that the normal map looks better as well, and other things. But essentially we'd have one body with modular heads, modular hands, modular feet. So that body could be a human body, it could be a goblin body, and if it's a goblin, you just change out the hands and the feet and the head. If it's a human versus a half orc, you just change out the head and then the textures. And each one of those would, the heads would have their own blend shapes, but they'd be standardized so that wardrobe for the body would work just on 2 different bodies, male and female, and the wardrobe for the head would be a little bit more complicated, but not so much that we can't make them. It would just be like, okay, everything's standardized, and if we did that, we'd be able to create new humanoid races, so cat people and whatever you want. And then
you got tails, though. The big giant problem at Sony was tails. Once they started putting in those races, helmets too, like you said, because heads always vary. But I remember all the drama about tails.
Yeah, I think for helmets, one of the key blend shapes for any non-standard human head is going to be a shape to make it a standard human head. For the I put on a helmet, now my cat ears are pushed down sort of thing. We do that similar with the chest on the female. There's some things that just make the chest smaller to use this armor. We're not going to have giant boob armor, so just make the chest smaller, and then you can wear the armor and it looks perfectly fine. So I think that would be the general catch-all of I have cat ears. Well, you put on this, or the horns even. I mean, horns might be a little bit more tricky, but I guess in that place, just be okay with horns sticking out of the helmet. I don't know.
So
Underpoint.
before we
No
go on to
helmet in
this
the game.
question, I want to just say congrats to our winner real quick. So the winner for the giveaway was Brian Purdy. Just shoot me an email at jason@game.courses, and I will send over your free tile kit bundle that Daniel has donated. Thanks again for that, and congrats to the winner. And now Yorai, there were a couple of follow-up questions about your URP stuff. The first one was this one down here that says shader using dots will send processing to CPU, not traditionally like GPU ? I'm not sure what the question means. Can you explain it a little?
Yeah, so I said earlier that with dots, you have a component that you can say, please use this with dots to say that I'm changing the material property blocks so that I can batch rendering and have everything working nice and quick and efficiently and cleanly. And that prompted this question because, dots runs mainly on CPU and not on GPU. To be clear here, this question is not changing how shaders work. They are still using rendering on the GPU. It's just changing how they are fed their information. So when you have a render call, you are saying, I need a render call with this shader, with these properties, and for this mesh, and with whatever vertices it has. In this matrix in the world, and this camera position, and etc., etc. Unity has to take all of that, feed that into the GPU for every render call that you make. And that is an extremely slow process. Now, there is a concept called batching, which is to say, I need these settings per scene, and also a bunch of these other settings, more than just one, for all the objects that I have, their position, their mesh, which usually needs to be identical, and the material, which also needs to be identical. And then you push all of that together, and this is render batching, which is way faster. Now, when you have a material and you want to make changes in that material, you're breaking the batching because you're essentially saying these are not the same material anymore. I don't want to use them together. You cannot batch this for me, and you're losing out on performance. So there is material instancing, and there's material property blocks that lets you say, I do need changes, but the changes are extremely small, and here are my overrides to put on top of the material. It's a bit complicated to process, but basically you can use that to kind of make things way faster to author. I probably explained a bit of it wrong, so please do your own research there. I simplified a bit too much, I think. But basically, shaders are still using the GPU. You're just feeding them information faster on the CPU side with dots.
So you're just sending the info over there faster, still doing the same, just getting that other part sped up. So there was one other dots question I want to pop up, but first I just wanted to remind everybody that we're going to have the meetup on Thursday. It is Thursday the 1st, right? Double checking. Yeah. So Thursday the 1st at 5 p.m. There's a link in the description. You can go add it to the calendar. Justin up there is going to give a talk on something VR related, and we'll have at least one other speaker giving a hopefully very interesting talk. If you want to be that speaker, shoot me an email, jason@game.courses, and we'll talk and get it figured out. It just has to be 15 minutes or so. Doesn't have to be perfect. Doesn't have to be polished, and we won't record it or live stream it. Just go out to everybody that's attending with us live. So just if you're interested in that, it's a lot of fun. It's a good opportunity to get used to speaking, get kind of some practice, or just try out a talk that you've already kind of got in mind and want to just practice on a little bit. So if that's the case, make sure that you email. If not, then just hit the button and come and we'll talk. You'll get to talk to everybody and gather. It's a really fun and hang out. And then afterwards, it looks like Andrew, if I can get my links over here, is going to be going live in just a few minutes. So if you want to join that, I'll make sure the link's in the description. Also, just drop it in chat. But you should probably be subscribed to Magic Pig Games anyway, so that you just get alerted and notified. And final thing on that, make sure that you hit the thumbs up button. If you're here with us live and enjoying it at all, even a tiny bit, just hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, and maybe go share the stream or drop a comment afterwards. Certainly helps. All right, now let's go to that other URP question. Or was this? This is I guess this was not a URP
It's a
question.
general, yeah, it's just
This
a
is
general
just
Unity
another
question.
question that I liked that we're gonna go through. So go ahead.
Yeah.
You want to read it? I'll read it and I'll let you answer it because it's going to be, I'm sure, a good long answer. I have a question about debugging. If the Unity editor freezes about a minute in play mode, how do I debug that? No errors. The profiler looks normal. Always have to force quit.
You know, there is a very easy trick to figure these out. All right. Break the fucking simulation. So when you have a code editor, an IDE, there is a feature where you can attach it to the Unity editor. And once attached, you can breakpoint, which is to say there is probably some code that is running an infinite loop in there somewhere. And you can just say, hey, break everything. Show me where you broke. And that will take you to the exact line in the code that is currently running. And you can see in which scope does it run. You can even go step by step and see why does it stay within the scope that it's likely staying. You probably have that usually with an infinite for loop or something that's starting to generate infinite information. If it is recursive, you'll usually get a Stack Overflow instead. So it's likely just a for loop that never ends. Usually accumulates data as well. If you open up Task Manager, you can usually see your RAM going up if it generates any amount of garbage at all, because it doesn't get any chance to take that garbage out. But yeah, just attach your IDE to the editor and hit break as soon as you see something wrong. And
let me show a way to do that real quick too. So here I'm attached and running in Rider debug or break, or it's running. It's not actually frozen, but I'm attached. But imagine that Unity is sitting in a loop. All you can do is go to the immediate window. If I can hide the comment here, you can just go, whoops, wrong spot for my mouse. You can go right down into the immediate window, which is, where did I lose it?
you already have the bars open up in the middle, and at the top there's like buttons ready for you.
I'm paused. That's why.
Yeah.
But what you can do is just go down in there, and what I did, if I can get my mouse in the right spot, is just type the debug break and break the application, and it pause. What did I do here? I totally messed up my. I'm looking at the wrong. I'm not good at controlling this thing across it. But you essentially type debug break at the immediate window. It breaks and stops right where the application is. If you don't know where the loop is, if you know where the loop is, you can just add a breakpoint. But if you don't know where it is, you just go in and.
Yeah, you don't even have to add a breakpoint though. There is a button straight at the top that looks like a pause button near the play button that you have. You can also press that. Yeah, which is for the Unity editor, but there is also one that should show where you can press that, and it will stop the entire code exactly at the line that is currently running. I do that a lot, primarily in Terraria, where it's not Unity, so I don't have these sets of buttons. But yeah, generally speaking, you don't want to start littering your code with debug.log or anything of the sort. You can just immediately find your answer with a simple tap of a button. And if you
I was trying to get my mouse into the right spot, and apparently I have no idea how to use. It's like the second I look down into the right to look at the screen, my brain shuts off, and I can't figure out how to use the UI anymore. So I don't know what's going on. I look down there, I'm like, wait, what? And then my mouse gets all lost, and it pops behind something. Yeah, but yeah, you can just debug and break right there.
Yeah, and Jason's story also says that it can be also synchronous thread lock on the UI, which is a thing. I did not have the pleasure of having that ever happen to me, but I did hear about it.
Cool. Well, I think we're just about out of time. I wanted to last mention Andrew's stream is going live in just a few minutes. It's linked in the chat, and it will be in the description. I'll drop it in chat again. And Justin is going to be speaking Thursday, and also releasing a new quiz and course. Do you want to mention anything about that before we go?
Yeah, sure. I can mention that again. There's a quiz down in the description. If you click on it, it's 13 questions, take you 60 seconds to go through, and it'll kind of gauge you about where you are in your game development, coding and how much VR knowledge you have, and kind of give you a percent score of how well you did. And then I will be releasing a VR course pre-sale, so we're going to build it together over the next few months tomorrow. So tomorrow to Thursday is when that sale goes live.
Nice. I'm gonna have to sign up and catch up on my VR stuff. I'm like way out of date. That I've got headsets,
a lot has
but
changed.
yeah, I can imagine. It's nice. I got back into the AR and VR stuff though with that Tilt 5 headset. I've been having a lot of fun with that thing.
Cool.
Yeah. So now it's kind of got me motivated. Now I want to get back, bust out my Quest, and see what other stuff is going on too. So there's one other question in chat about the show length. Is it only going to be an hour? So for now, at least for the short time, yeah, I think we're going to switch them to just be an hour on the live ones, or right around an hour, a little over. And then we continue to do some recorded ones. So there's one coming out tomorrow with John Riccatello. There was another one with Johnny Thompson that released earlier, which thank you, Johnny. That was a great practice for the Riccatello one, because I did not want to go into that thing unpracticed and unprepared on my one-on-one stuff. So that was awesome. But I plan to continue to do a couple more one-on-one interviews, maybe one or somewhere between 1 and 3 a week mixed in. And then we'll just go live again once a week, probably for an hour or so, or however long we've got. But I want to try to not go too long and overload it. So we'll keep it probably around there. And also next week, I think we're going to move it to Monday. I'm just figuring out the exact time. It'll either be 9 or maybe noon. We'll get it locked down. I'll send out some emails and I will pre-schedule it way in advance. That way everybody knows. So if you're at work on Monday and want to come join us, it should be fun. But before that, don't forget the meetup that's coming on this Thursday. So come join us there, and also hit the like, subscribe, and share button. And anybody got anything else?
For the next week's show, be sure to set your reminders on as soon as the pre-show is available on YouTube. Yeah.
Oh, yes, definitely. And set a reminder for the interview tomorrow, too. It's going to be a fun one.
I'm excited for that.
That'll be really cool.
And make sure to check out the course and Andrew's stream and
check it all out. It's all
the buttons down in the description.
We want all of your attention.
all the buttons.
Let's go add. I'm going to go add that link in the description for Andrew's stream, and then I will hit the button. Andrew is live now. Here's the link. Save, and I will say goodbye. Let me find the button, the goodbye button. Bye, everybody.
Nice. See y'all.
Bye.